Guys, today we've changed leg direction.
Okay.
This is the Go Maluku podcast.
Welcome to Go Maluku podcast. This is the second day of the expert workshop on enhanced participation of Indigenous Peoples representative institutions. I got it right this time. And we have the same guests, Ini, Frank, and Tiana. And it's been a long day. We dealt with two themes for this expert workshop. The first one being the participation modalities, and the second being the selection criteria. And we had numerous speakers and experts contributing today, including everybody here actually, right? So let's reflect on today's input and look forward to tomorrow's discussion. So let's start with Ini, your first intervention today on modalities. Tell us a little bit about what you said and perhaps why you said it. Why you think the way you did when you said what you said. Sorry.
You got that right?
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
I already forgot what I said. No, actually, it's like I was thinking a little bit about what I'm going to say yesterday, but I got like all different point of view with people and going on the same things that I wanted to say. So what I did is like say something about a few comments and from my point of view, from a Ayala point of view, let's say that. So yes, first interview, and always the first thing is most complicated step that you do. So it was exciting. I hope by tomorrow I can interview again and say something, but I have a lot of things written, so it's time to come up.
Frank, modalities, participation?
Well, as you know, I deferred my comments yesterday till today. And so I commented about venue and modalities today, both. And sort of a general thing, before I did that, I got into the history a little of how we got where we are. And the idea that participation was, participation is mentioned in the UN Declaration. But then we had the meeting in Alta that was going to how we were going to see that implemented, with 350 delegates from all over, indigenous to 7 regions, and in that work on the Alta outcome document, a number of us worked hard to make sure that participation of indigenous nations and that we were in there, and that process was part of it. And it ended up being the last item that was in the negotiation. And in the end, it was reached by consensus by everybody there. And one of the things that it did is it laid out tried to find a way to talk about, the state-recognized governments that there are in some areas, and talk about self-identified governments in other areas, but then talk about traditional governments and things in places where in countries that maybe don't admit to even having indigenous people, but still have indigenous people that are governing themselves in a variety of ways, because there's a lot of different levels of governing. And so governing may be regulating how you express yourself at a traditional powwow or ceremony. Governing can be how you relate to the natural resources. It can be how you relate to each other in marriage or in death. There's all these different ways that governing is. It isn't just laws and courts and police and things of that sort. There's this whole spectrum of the way that we govern ourselves. And so we wanted to include all the indigenous people who are self-identified as the governments, as governing, in whatever way that's described. So we think that we captured that, and many times we have people who keep referring back to the Alta document, because that document then informed, this was in 2013, and 14 months later in 2014, the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous People that was adopted by the UN, that also then contained participation. And so it's that, because of that process, it's why we end up here in this room. Why we're here today is to implement those provisions that are in those documents. And that's how we got to where we are. So I felt it was important there's a number of people here who were in the room, who were in those rooms and those at that time, but up to that point, no one had really spoken strongly about this. And I felt it was important for everyone to hear that and to have that be part of the record of this meeting. So I spoke to that, and then talked about what does it mean for venue and modalities. Venue is everywhere, and modalities are being able to do whatever we need to do in those places. I mean, you could say it a lot more complicated than that, but that's the essence of it. And so that was what I relayed today.
Tiana?
Yeah, I guess like today in framing my intervention on modalities, I kind of wanted to build on the whakapapa of what these two laid down, given that I've been involved in this process a lot longer and had more understanding of the background and how to direct the conversation. So I guess, yeah, I positioned my intervention to kind of bring the conversation back to the core of what we're here for, which is the enhanced participation of Indigenous peoples under the Human Rights Council, as opposed to just increasing potential participation of Indigenous peoples at the Human Rights Council. So I positioned my intervention to kind of say, like, well, maybe I'll give a read on the room first. The consensus that I was gaining from the room is that people were settling with having 7 socio-cultural representatives from each of the regions to be enough for increased participation under the Human Rights Council, which I'm like, that doesn't actually increase our enhanced participation at this forum, because we wouldn't be able to participate, as Frank has said, as our own sovereign nation states. So I kind of pulled back and I said, that's not good enough. We need to be able to be here, because where we've seen 7 socio-cultural regions implemented in other mechanisms like the UNFCCC, it hasn't worked. And if anything, that's probably created more rifts, because one person cannot represent a region of diverse peoples who come from different cultures, have different laws and ways of implementing how their knowledge systems work. Yeah.
I mean, I guess the idea would be if you were to take the nations of North America and let them select one person to speak for them. Yeah. Or take the nations of the Pacific and expect one person to speak for all the Pacific nations. Right. Or for that matter, Europe. Yeah. They couldn't agree to it. No. Well, as representing the nations that I represent, I can't agree to that. I mean, that's just not, we have to have something different than that. It's got to be something that is, where if an elected leader of one of the nations from, that I'm representing wants to come, they have to be able to come in their own status as a leader, not as an observer or they can't come as an NGO. Like, my only way to get, I guess the example I can give you is that when I went to the World Conference on Indigenous People, I had to go through an NGO to get there. Yeah. And so, I think that we're trying to fix that. So,
because I do see, the 7 social-cultural regions for Indigenous peoples being used quite often in different forums. I guess it has its advantages and disadvantages. Sometimes it's being used as shorthand by the states to just frame the discussions on how Indigenous people should be represented in the UN. So I'm just wondering if you have a broad reflection on how, since the since the beginning of the participation of indigenous peoples, we see this 7 socio-economic regions being used in different contexts. And I'm just wondering if you have a broad reflection on what it actually does, how it actually shapes, how it actually has been shaping indigenous peoples' representation in the UN, and whether it needs to change, perhaps. Big question.
No.
From your region, as Latin America, from Latin America.
From, let's say, the Warabia Yala, Latin America. Actually, since I started on this field, International Forum, that was always been my question. Where is the place that, as a beginner, I could go, let's say, in Latin America? And there is a lot of Foro de Aviala, it's related to CBD, you have another one, but there is no one that I could get and make questions. So, talking about the participation and mechanisms today, not everyone came talking about the different 7 sociocultural regions and how it should be happening. And you're trying to figure it out what happened before and what we can change to make efficiency. The decision making here related, like how we can choose a person who's going to represent us. And then we got that each region has their way to make a decision, and everyone's like from their own region, they know what do they have best and what they have a lack, they need to strengthen. So, but yeah, I think that still we are gonna have a huge, let's say, I would use the word opportunity to talk about it, to figure out what's gonna be the best. There is a lot of things that we need to take in consideration, as Frank said. Territories, like countries as a nation, some people say languages. So a lot of things we need to come together still to get to the right point. And so today we just started and we still have tomorrow for that. So I think I will have the night to think about it,
Okay.
to figure out what would be the best way to that we can do it. But I think we are agreed that we need to do that.
Frank, regions?
Well, I think in the discussion on regions, there was this, I raised this possibility once before in discussion, is that the nations of the world, the parties, have organized themselves into groups that are not necessarily divided by the socio-cultural regions of the UN, but these groups span different regions. But they're groups that work together and have, for their own purposes, have decided that they like working together. They think fairly common issues, and they often will have one spokesperson that'll speak. So when we have a meeting, one person speaks for the group. And then other people, if from the group, can speak if they choose, but rarely do they speak. But often, sometimes there'll be 1 or 2 of them that will speak. So, but the idea is that they've organized themselves along that line. And that's how they figure out how to have less people speak at a single meeting, but still get the views from everybody.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about doing the same thing here. But what they're trying to do is divide us into regions, tell everybody in that region, you gotta come together with one person.
Yeah.
Well, that I don't think that we can accept that, because that isn't going to work for the same reason it won't work for the parties. It does. They organize by how they think and work together. They don't organize by region. And so, if we're going to have some form of consolidation for the purpose of efficiency in meetings, I think it's got to be along the line, sort of about how we think together. So, and the essence I can tell you is that in my case, I'm here I'm in an ambassadorial capacity, representing the National Congress of American Indians, which is an ECOSOC registered body, but I represent some 200 plus nations, and I'm here representing them. I can't bind them to anything, but I can take back what I learn, and so I'm here like an ambassador. So we're already doing what I'm suggesting, in a way. Yeah. It's already happening. Yeah. And so I think that's, those are the kind of things that I can see it's possible. But I think that's going to be a big stumbling block, is that whole idea of how you, the criteria for how you select is tied to this idea of regions, which is also tied to the, and then eventually what you can do when you're there, modalities. We still have that. Yeah. We're still in the middle of all that.
we just started.
But the thing that we should not lose sight of is we're here, and there is no order to the speaking. In other words, anybody in the room is that the speakers list is taken by the order in which people put their names in, and there's no preference given to state parties or indigenous parties. So it's essentially, in this meeting, we've achieved what we wanted to achieve in the end.
That's great.
So this transported to another hole over there.
This is exactly the sort of format that we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Tiana? Thoughts?
Excuse me.
Wait, we're recording. We're recording.
Blooper. It's good because we just finished Frank, and then Andrea came in, so I'm sure Ghazali can do something about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like give you a little bit more time to think about it. What you wanted to say, Tiana?
Yeah, I think in regards to regions, the Pacific is broken down into Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia.
Yeah.
3 vastly different groupings of people within a span of space that spans 1/3 of the Earth's surface. And so trying to amalgamate such a big area with vast groupings of indigenous peoples just doesn't really work, when also the issues and experiences that we're all facing in our lands, while similar and shared, are also really vastly distinct to whatever issue that's going on at a time. So I don't think it's actually fair to have one person expected to, or given the mandate to represent all of the people, nor do I think that actually enhances the participation of any of what it means to, whakamana or empower the rights of indigenous peoples, or anything along those lines. And as Frank said, this is a great example in this current meeting of how indigenous peoples and states can work together. And so, in terms of modalities, when we talk about being given equal access, speaking rights, and space, this is an example which we need to tell them, it's working already. It's not some new conceived notion. So let's just give space for that. Come on.
That sounds like an intervention.
Yeah.
Concluding remark of this workshop.
Will be like concluding remark.
But how different will indigenous relations be if it was in fact organized by more position-based clusters than a region-based cluster?
What's tomorrow going to be like?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of question we don't know.
Yeah.
Well, we can have a vision, we can see what we would like it to be, but until it's actually happening, it'll be hard to say exactly what it's going to be. But I think that we know that there's all this stuff that we're doing has never been done before in this forum. And so until we actually are doing it, we're not going to understand the limitations or the challenges of it.
Yeah.
But we're making a step away from where we've been, because where we've been doesn't work. And we're moving in a different direction.
Yeah.
And we'll see, hopefully we're moving in a direction where we make things better.
Yeah.
And the best I can say is that.
Yeah.
You know?
No, but actually, I would like to thank you what you have done and the people who started. Actually, it's important to have it recorded and that we can keep it for future generation. But as I said in the morning, that these spaces it was not given hey, by the states. I would like to give you the opportunity we gained by time. Asking, and maybe on the street also. So about these all things that they did before, and now we are here and seeing these changes. The order of people talking within states, and that's great. So be proud that they have done.
It's also great that states are also thinking with indigenous peoples on how this could go forward. And I guess they also have uncertainty in terms of where this might go. And perhaps they're more worried about that uncertainty, perhaps, because they are concerned about, as we heard today, different issues that might arise, and perhaps that concern is also an obstacle, perhaps, for indigenous peoples. And I just wonder, what would you, for example, say to the states that are concerned right now with different issues? And I know that Kenneth opened up a little bit in addressing these concerns. But did you have anything to add to what Kenneth was saying?
Actually, just I would like to listen the states, maybe the opposite side, because not always if someone is giving me a reason like this, you're right, you may think, okay, I'm doing everything right. Maybe we are missing something, so I'm just kind of would like to listen some states that they are hey, I don't like these positions, and why, to know why, so we can reflect and to see how we can make it better.
I know one of the objections that was raised was that what happens when there's competing authorities from a particular nation, and in a much smaller venue, in a much smaller case, but in a no less important one, I had to deal with that, and we signed an agreement called the Tribal and First Nations Great Lakes Water Accord in the Great Lakes, and there's 185 tribes and First Nations in the Great Lakes Basin, and we had on the signing sheet that we created, we had one place for a signature for each one, and then we had two people show up to sign in several cases. So we had to come up with something real quick. So we came up with a second list that was a witness list for everybody in the room. So we not only have the one list here, so we may have a traditional leader here and the elected leader here, or vice versa, but they both got to sign. So we found to find a way to include everybody with not excluding anybody. But I had to deal with that in this other basis where we had competing thoughts. And I think that we're going to have those kind of things. It's inevitable that there will be some conflict. That's the whole idea about these group governance like this. If it was really slick and straight and everything worked fine, there'd be something wrong. Yeah. I mean, in other words, it's messy.
Yeah.
And part of the job of good governance is to figure out how to work through the mess,
Yeah.
how to work through those things. And I think that's what we have to. We have that in store for us coming up.
Yeah. Anything you'd like to add? You don't have to.
I think I've kind of said it all, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess like the one thing that the point that I am kind of coming back to is like in the suggestion of the 7 sociocultural groupings, which I found quite depressing. The thing that I found hope out of that was a state representative coming back and saying, what about instead of having the socio-cultural seats, it was just 7 seats where Indigenous peoples could self-organise, you know. If a particular issue was coming up to the Human Rights Council that was of particular importance to them, then they could self-select who was most affected by the issue and best to speak on it, whether that be just for one agenda item and then a new set come in, like, you know, having that space. Yeah, that's one thing that I'm slowly hanging on to hope for from out of today. Yeah.
Okay, so tomorrow we'll be continuing on with selection criteria and what was it, selection mechanism. Any kind of any preview as to what you might say tomorrow, if you're planning to say anything? Or do you want to wait for tomorrow to kind of think about it?
Wait till tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm thinking still about mechanism.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm prepared to answer that today.
Yeah.
I know that I've given it some thought, and criteria and mechanism go along because depending on the criteria that you use, it's going to affect the mechanism. And so if you're not settled on criteria, it's hard to decide on the mechanism.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think we're going to have to sort of sort that through as we go here.
Yeah.
So but I guess our goal here is to end up with a report that will then adequately advise the Human Rights Council in their debate on this issue.
Absolutely.
I don't know what I'm going to say yet. I agree with what Frank said, but I guess in coming to spaces like this and in entering as an Indigenous person, the thing that's always forefront for me is like what's going to move my people, tangata whenua of Aotearoa and like Indigenous peoples from around the world closer towards tino rangatiratanga, and that is self-determination and sovereignty of our peoples, of our lands, of our voices in institutions like that. So that's the framework of tomorrow's discussion.
But in the end, all the topics are like linked. So, and remembering also that we are looking for a status for Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
And we'll hope to see more states engaging with conversation tomorrow. I'm pretty sure selection mechanism is something that states have a lot to say about. So, and of course, Indigenous peoples too.
I think the one observation that we heard yesterday, everybody was sort of pro on the state side. Today, we heard states disagreeing with each other. So, once we started getting into the nitty-gritty a little, and so there's one would come up say one thing, and the other would say the opposite. And so now, what did they say? That means you're in negotiation.
Preview of what's to come, perhaps in the future. Okay, so thanks so much for your time once again, and we'll get back tomorrow. It's the final day of the thematic discussion before moving into writing recommendation reports. So we'll hopefully know more about what might come in the report by tomorrow evening. So thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My friends, I hope you enjoyed this. Please consider to subscribe, to comment, and to share this video on your socials.